Hey guys, we're back and working on the X5 tonight. It's been a couple days since I worked on it, so it's good to finally get back to it. Anyways, tonight's agenda, I guess, is to remove the water pump, the crank pulley, also known as the harmonic balancer, and the alternator, and as well as the belt tensioners. There's one there, and then there's one there. Still getting the hang of this camera, so bear with me here. And then once I have those removed, I should be able to undo the lower timing cover, and that's where the real fun stuff kind of happens. And the water pump is off, along with the harmonic balancer crankshaft pulley thing. That's over there now. And the water pump's right here. And it is a really dirty, nasty water pump. Alright, so the next step now is to remove this alternator right there. And to do that, I have to disconnect the battery first. Now, as you may or may not know, the battery is in the trunk here. So that makes for a very entertaining experience. And as you can tell, it's raining outside. Which is pretty uncommon in Arizona of all places, but besides the point. Alternator's been removed, and I got that stubborn tensioner pulley out too. Yeah, notice how there's a water-cooled alternator, because BMW felt like that should be water-cooled. Even though it's kind of silly considering how, unreliable their cooling systems are. But yeah. So that came out, and as usual, it is filthy down there. On to the next step, we're removing the intake manifold. Why am I doing this? It's because I need to, I want to replace the valley pan gasket and the intake manifold gasket, since it looks pretty grubby under there, and I'm not sure if that's ever been replaced, so I might as well, because once the intake manifold gaskets start going, they make for kind of a rough idle on the cold startup. Like my Range Rover had that issue too. So at 213,000 miles, it's about due, even if they've been replaced anyways. So that's relatively easy. All I have to do is undo that fuel connection there with the quick disconnect, and then I have to undo 10, 11 millimeter nuts all around this. And then in theory it should pull off. There's a couple of hoses at the back I gotta disconnect, but other than that it should be pretty straightforward. So let's see how this works out. Intake manifold is off. Check that out. It came off pretty easily. There were a couple of pipes and hoses and things to disconnect in the back there, but overall nothing too challenging. As you can see, it's pretty filthy under here. Valves look decent though. But I'm definitely glad I'm doing the valley pan replacement. I don't know if you can see there, but there's a bit of a coolant right there, mixed with some oil from the valve covers. And there's some more coolant in the back there, and it's just really gross overall. So I'm happy I'm redoing the gaskets on all of that. That definitely needs to be done. And then here's what the intake manifold looks like removed from the car. So it's just this giant bread looking piece of thing. There's the oil separator. Here it's all here, whereas in the E38 and E39, this piece right here is actually hidden behind the chain guide. So arguably this is easier to replace. How much easier? Meh. Not too much, because you still have to tear apart the whole intake manifold to get at it. You can't replace this thing with the manifold in the car. That just isn't going to happen. Another interesting tidbit, the hose at the end of this oil separator has just kind of dissolved with age, so that'll have to be replaced too. So I'll have to figure out what to do with that. But yep. The box of parts is getting pretty comprehensive now. There's all these bags. They're all tagged. so that I'll have an easy time to reassemble it all later. It's another night and we're back here in the garage working on the X5. We're going to work on breaking loose this crank bolt right here, also known as the Jesus bolt by some in the community because of its insane torque. It's something like 350 or 400 foot-pounds, something crazy. And it's also a stretch bolt, so it's pretty tricky to get out. So what I'm going to do is spray it down with some PB Blaster to maybe loosen it up a little bit. Then I'm going to attach a crank holding tool and then use a 3/4 inch drive breaker bar with a 6-foot pipe over it, and hopefully that'll give me the leverage to break this little sucker loose. So I've done it 6 times already, so let's see how this works out. Well, that went a little easier than expected, I'd say. I just set up my my crank holding tool over there. I just bolted that onto there and propped it against the frame rail and just gave it a good cranking with my 3/4 inch breaker bar with a 3/4 inch drive bit, which was pretty hard to find, but there's that. And then I used that big pipe over there as a cheater pipe to give me a little bit more leverage, and this one came off very easily, almost suspiciously easy, I'd say. It was kind of weird. I had to put the hood into service mode, as BMW calls it, because this one doesn't have an easy service mode like the other BMWs do with like putting a bolt into the hinge. So I ended up having to use a handle from an old hydraulic jack, kind of just propped it up, and it seems to be holding okay for now. Right now the focus is getting this cabin air filter housing out. Alright guys, check it out. This whole cabin air filter housing came out pretty easy. It was 2 13mm bolts on either side. There and there. It's this giant assembly over here. I'll probably want to clean that before I put it back in the car. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. That was nice and easy. Definitely have to keep that in mind in the future. Look how much room there is now. Look at all that. I can like see everything now. That's so awesome. But yeah, and then next step is removing this tank right here, and that I have an idea for actually. I was thinking about draining it and then removing it, but I'm kind of looking at it now and there's enough slack in that little hose over there that I could probably just you know, detach it from its mounts and just scooch it forward a bit, and that'll give me the room to, you know, play with the camshafts later. So I'm gonna give that a shot and we'll see how that turns out. So the washer fluid reservoir is out. Check that out. I actually ended up just propping up the little pumps so that they wouldn't leak. I think the next step is going to be putting this hood back into its normal position, jacking this whole thing up, and then I'm going under. Oh, by the way, for the fluid reservoir, I thought I could just tilt it forward and stuff, but these all these little hoses for it made it kind of impossible, so I ended up having to drain it. I used a fluid transfer pump, which of course made a huge mess on the floor here. I used to have a roach problem in this garage. Used to being the key word. It's too toxic for anything to live here now. And there's that reservoir. Now I have my X5 jacked up in the air. This is the first time I've ever done this with this one, so it was a bit of an interesting experience. I found the jack point after a bit of Googling though, so yeah. It's less drama than my Range Rover though, for sure, because this only has the air suspension in the rear and it's not nearly as finicky as the Range Rover's was. With the Range Rover, every time you jacked it up, the air suspension would just freak out. Just give you tons of errors, but yeah, let's dive under and take a look at what we got. It is really nasty under here, as you can tell by all these napkins laying around. Or paper towels, rather. I spilled a bunch of coolant under here, so those are soaking that up. And the floors are just generally disgusting here, so I would not recommend being down here. And right there is that reinforcement plate that I'm going to be removing. That's got a bunch of 16mm bolts. Once that reinforcement plate is removed, I'm going to drain the oil and remove the lower oil pan, and we'll see what we can find. We've removed the reinforcement plate, which was a giant pain in the ass. It was a 16mm bolts with nuts on the other side. Supposedly the bolts are the kind that you have to replace. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to reuse them because it's just a plate. I drained the oil. A lot of oil came out. Didn't look too bad. And disconnected the oil level sensor, which is that thing over there. And now we're going to undo all the bolts that go around that oil pan right there. Should be pretty quick with my drill right here. So the oil pan is off now, and as you can see, it's pretty gross, but it's not too bad. Like, if you zoom in a little bit, you can see the chain guide pieces. So there's the oil pan, well, the upper oil pan with the lower oil pan removed. You can see the oil pump pickup screen. It's got a few little bits there. It's not too bad. Side note, it is really nasty and dirty under here. I'm talking like you see all these chunks, there's like chunks of dirt that fell out as I was undoing things. It's pretty gross under here. Let's just say I've gone through more than a fair share of gloves at this point. Anyways, I also removed the steering pump. Yeah, that's the power steering pump. There's a bolt at the back and 2 bolts in the front. That came off easily. And then I also removed, I don't know how well you can see at this point, but I also removed the bolts that hold the timing cover on from the bottom. Yeah. So now we're going to put this whole thing down on its wheels, and then we're going to go back up top and start doing some work there. Got to lock the timing and remove that lower timing cover. Alright, so now that the X5 is back on the ground, I was able to put the locking blocks onto the camshafts. This is the toolkit from German Auto Solutions, which I think is actually better than the official BMW style tools, because check this out. These cam lock blocks right there, they actually lock onto the camshafts. So, as opposed to having the BMW tools, which are just friction fitted onto both camshafts, these lock each individual camshaft, and then have a little wing nut there to secure it to the actual camshaft studs. So that's pretty cool. I was able to get all of them lined up super nicely. You can see here too. Very easy, very painless. See those blocks, they're laying flush to the head. This will probably make timing a lot easier, because with the other tools, I was always worried about them, popping off, and sometimes they wouldn't. I'd have to, tweak the timing. But in this case, these tools are far superior, I'd say. So I'm pretty excited about this so far. I've got the crank locked, I've got those locked, so I think I'm about ready to start taking off that lower timing cover. So it's the moment we've all been waiting for, right? So the steps to that are pretty simple. I have to undo that crank bolt again, which is held in there pretty loosely, so that should come out by hand. And then I have to undo a whole bunch of bolts going all around the lower timing cover, and I already undid the ones from below, so now it's just a matter of undoing these ones from the top. So I guess let's get to it. Alright, so after some fighting, the lower timing cover came off. That was a pain. It rattled me the entire way too. But yeah, if we take a look here, you can see the guide pieces. They're like all over the place. There's some there. I don't know how well you can see, but there's some down there. They're literally everywhere. Guide piece for you, and a guide piece for you, and a guide piece for everybody. As I suspected, the tensioning guide has no plastic at all, and nor does the center guide, the U guide. That has no plastic left whatsoever either. But surprisingly, this static guide here, this plastic one, is completely intact. So I guess the chain guides weren't that far gone. I mean, they were. I mean, There's bits of plastic literally everywhere in this engine, and it actually started scraping the timing cover a bit, so there's like aluminum shavings in the pan too. This is what the timing cover looks like when it's been removed. It's absolutely filthy and disgusting, but I'll degrease it really well and it should look okay. And this is a very handy trick I've been using on all of my jobs to remember where all the bolts go. I just draw a little crude diagram on a box, and then I just put all the bolts where they should be. Now there's 15 bolts in the front, and then there are 6 bolts down below. The bolts from down below are still on the ground, but you have to make sure to get those too, because it's secured from the top and bottom. And luckily for me, and on every single job I've done really here, the lower or upper oil pan gasket is still in good shape, so I could just clean it up, put a little dab of silicone at the edges, and reuse it. Alright, we're back here tonight working on this X5. It's Christmas Eve now, but I'm still working. Anyways, so today I've removed the vanish units and timing chains completely from here, as you can see by the lack of timing chains. It's pretty cool to see an engine so stripped down, but I'm actually going to go a step further after I do the vanish units, and you'll get to see that as well. I'm going to be taking off these vanish distribution pieces right here. So yeah, and then going to be taking off these guides as well, and you'll get a detailed look at how bad they are after so many miles. But I gotta say, these camshaft locking block tools make this job very easy. I counter-held it just in case to avoid damaging the camshafts, but you probably could get away without it. These all of the bolts here, they're very high torque and right-hand thread, so you loosen them by turning right. But they all came loose pretty easily with these lock blocks, so very happy about that. Bolts weren't damaged, my bits weren't damaged, so I've had this part of the job go wrong so many times, so it's really nice to see everything kind of go as planned for once. And I'm also going to replace the little plastic guides on these tensioners right there. These cam chain tensioners. Let me focus on that. Yeah, because they're not super worn, but they are pretty worn, so worth replacing. Yep. And there are the vanish units in there, waiting to be rebuilt. Right here we have the pieces I just removed. These are the timing chains, all 3 of them, the main one and the 2 camshaft timing chains. Normally I would only replace the main chain and reuse the camshaft timing chains. However, being that this car, or truck rather, has 213,000 miles, I'm going to replace all 3 chains. The camshaft chains were only $20, so it's not too much of an extra expense. And I also made sure, as you could see there, by that little marking I made, P, I made sure to mark that that's the passenger side. I mean, these are all interchangeable side to side, but I just like to stay organized, just in case. Alright, we're in the final stage of disassembly now. We're going to remove these what's left of these chain guides here, and then once those are removed, we're going to remove the vanish distribution pieces. That's what those are called. That way we can replace the oil check valves behind them in the gaskets. And then lastly, we'll be removing these camshaft chain tensioners. There's one on this side and one on this side, so should be pretty simple overall to get all this off. So as you can see now, the chain guides are all completely removed. Anyways, let me show you what the guides look like. So this is what the U-shaped guide looks like. Yep, all original. Looks like it wasn't scraping on the metal for too long, because the ridges are really not that deep at all. It's definitely been shined up by the chain, but I wouldn't say this has run for very long with the chain slapping around, which is good. These guides are all original. 2002 production date codes on all of them. So that one's bad. As in, no plastic at all on that, no plastic at all on this. Yeah, there's supposed to be plastic on all these. I'll show you what the new guides look like when I install them, so you can kind of compare. As I mentioned before, this other plastic guide was surprisingly intact. It's got some grooves and stuff with age, but really not bad at all for what it is. I assume this guy doesn't see very much abuse, and that's why it survived pretty unscathed. But it was pretty interesting overall, and I collected all the guides in a little Talenti cup here for your viewing pleasure. There's a whole lot of them there. See that? That's what exploded guides look like. Alright, so next step is removing the vanish distribution pieces on both sides and the camshaft chain tensioners. There's a couple of E-Torx bolts and then 11mm bolts holding on the tensioners, so it should take a few minutes. Alright, fully stripped down now. You can see that I removed the vanish distribution pieces, and I also removed the oil check valves there. I'll show you what those look like in a second. I also removed these camshaft chain tensioners. Same on this side. So, yep, that's all removed. And I also removed a little O-ring that goes here. You can see that. A lot of guides don't mention that O-ring, but that O-ring is what supplies oil to the external chain tensioner, so it's advisable to replace it. Anyways, that's what that looks like, and these are what the pieces I removed look like. Not the most nice presentation of them, for sure, but, you know, it is what it is. These are the cam chain tensioners, and as you can see, the plastic pieces are pretty worn down, so what I did was I bought new plastic pieces and new O-rings for that little thing over there, and I'm just going to swap those out, and that negates having to buy a brand new tensioner. A lot of kits online, like on ECS, they'll be selling the whole tensioner assembly for $120 or something, and you really don't need to replace that. The tensioners themselves don't go bad, it's the little guides on them, so just replace those and it's all fine and dandy. Alright, so with that said, that concludes the disassembly of this M62 TUB46. With the disassembly complete, that means the next episode we'll be putting it all back together. We're going to be putting the chains back on, the vanish units back on, new guides, going to be timing it all. As you can see, I still have the timing lock blocks installed to make sure that the timing stays locked and in place. So there's going to be quite a bit more to do, but this is pretty much the halfway point. Maybe 50-55% complete. So if you're doing this on your car and you've gotten this far, congrats. It only goes up from here. I mean, nothing from here on out is too difficult. You know, disassembling is always a lot harder in this car's case, just because everything's so dirty and stuck, and now that things have been removed, putting things back on should be pretty easy. You don't have to do nearly as much crazy torquing as you did to remove stuff, so that's pretty cool. Alright, and with that, this vlog is over. See you in the next one.